Hello and welcome. My name is Stephen, Dr. Stephen Hairfield. I'm going to speak with you today about a very interesting subject, at least in my mind, and that's called the human ego. To me, the ego is probably one of the most misunderstood attributes of all of us humans. An ego, like the biblical texts tell us, they term it as Satan or the tempter. And in the idea of temptation, the ego can swing either way. The ego can go in positive directions. Look at what Michelangelo did with the Sistine Chapel, amongst so many other people. To me, the ego is the creative power of a person. And then, of course, we have people such as Adolf Hitler, and look what they've done. Uh, so the ego can essentially work in either direction. But in truth, the ego, in and of itself, always attempts to work for us if we learn to use it. In the Far East, when you're studying as a monk, they teach you to use the ego as a tool, as a way to really understand yourself and the things that we do and understanding why we do them. And we can do any and all of that without any level of analysis. We spend way too much time within our own minds attempting to analyze and figure out everything when we really don't have to. Because to me, everything that goes on inside of us is quite obvious. So if we learn to use the ego as a tool or as a teacher, it can show us so many things about ourselves. Yes, it'll show us our weaknesses. It'll show us our strengths. Even the idea of arrogance, that's just confidence that is more ego-based than anything in the world. But when we learn to understand what the ego attempts to teach us about ourselves all the time, then we move away from arrogance and we step into confidence because we're standing in our true selves, in who we are. You may find what I'm about to say is kind of absurd, but hear me out. If I were to have to peg the two largest egos that have probably ever lived in the history of the world, and there have been many, are people such as the one that we term as the Christ and the Buddha. But what they did is they learned to hone their own ego into its true nature, which is a divine space. It's part of us. It is us. What would a human being be without an ego? Because so many people say the ego has to go away. No, it doesn't. It just has to be trained. The ego, like the mind, is like a wild animal. The truth is, we've just allowed the ego to roam freely and do whatever it is wanted to do our entire lives, no matter what your age is. And the same is true about our minds. We allow it just to think, and think about what? Doesn't have to. And neither does the ego have to be used in the way that we use it. Funny thing is I don't believe anybody ever teaches anyone in this part of the world the true value of the ego. In India, there's a saying. That saying says that when the student is ready, the teacher will come. And that's a dual meaning there. When the student is ready and the teacher will come, that could be somebody such as myself or an Eckhart Tolle or Wayne Dyer. It could be many, many people. Virtually every person you meet in your life or every experience you have in your life is in essence a teacher of yourself. But the other meaning of that statement is simply this, that when you are ready, your own teacher awakens within you and teaches you. So you become your own student and your own teacher. And that's the whole idea behind monastic living, is being your own teacher through the observation of just simply who you are and what you do. Not attempting to figure it out, just allowing yourself to simply be who you are. You see, in that ego thing, it can be used for such wonderful things, even saving your own life. And of course, the ego can be used to take another human's life. And we use the ego, for the most part, in this part of the world, for very negative reasons. And it doesn't have to be that way. The ego can be one of the most phenomenal teachers. Here's an example, if you will. Let's say you have a weakness, whatever that weakness may be. The ego is always going to go to that point first and attempt to use, on the surface, attempt to use that ego or that weakness against you. But no, what it's really doing is it's teaching you to take that weakness and hone it because it's constantly showing it to you. Let's say that you're a person with a temper and your ego is driving that temper. And of course, the ego drives the temper. The ego drives temper, the things like anger, impatience. It can drive all sorts of things. But even if you look at the idea of anger, what your ego is actually doing is it's attempting to demonstrate to you the opposite of what you're doing, that you can be peaceful in that moment as opposed to letting go of your anger. Or if you are experiencing a level of impatience, the same thing is true, that the ego is attempting to teach you how to be patient with not only your own self, but any other human that you encounter. And besides, if you really think about something like anger or impatience, those are just uh, other versions of levels of selfishness, that you want your way, that you are the most important thing that there is. Well, that's not true. You may think that, but that's just your ego attempting to get you to believe that. And if you do believe that, then you will learn nothing about the idea of humility. Humility with yourself. You see, to me, the ego can be such a wonderful tool if you learn to pay attention to it. And you learn to pay attention in specific at how it actually operates within you. Anytime that you react to something, I'm certain that you're going to come from an ego point of view. But if you learn to act on things, then the ego is no longer in control of you. You are in control of it. And that's the whole idea, for us to learn to control our egos. If we all learn to control our egos and use it as a tool, we would truly step into being very powerful people. And that's certainly not to say that we're not. But when we have the ego trained to work for us and with us, we are able to do amazing things. And we see that all the time in events in this world, that how a person steps up and does some amazing things. They do it because of their ego. The ego is a very, very strong attribute. You know, so many people have talked about historically about the ego has to go away, the ego has to die. No, it does not, because if it did, we would just be on automatic pilot. Where would the individual be? Where would individuality be? In my mind, it wouldn't be any place, because it's the ego that brings about that idea of the portrayal of the character of a person. The ego is the character of a person if we use it with wisdom, if we allow our wise mind to have room for the proper use of the ego. And it's just simply learning to hone it. Find out what it's doing with you and for you, and also learn to recognize what it's doing that is not in your best interest. And that's where you put your focus. You put your focus on what it's doing that is not in your best interest. Let's say that you're a person that's insecure. You can turn that level of insecurity into an incredible level of strength if you listen to what your ego is sharing with you about you. It attempts to show you why you are insecure. It attempts to show you why you may require another person's approval. When we learn to work with it as opposed to fighting against it, then it begins to work for us. But I can assure you, if you've never attempted that, it'll be like taking on a wild beast at first. And you don't take on everything about the ego all at once. Look, whatever you feel inside or whatever you think inside of you is negative. Whatever you think about you that is actually a weakness, or whatever you think within you that is holding you back from your greatest dream, really take a look at it and really be objective. When I say take a look at it, I'm not sitting here saying to you, analyze it, figure it out, figure it out, figure it out. I'm not. What I'm suggesting is you learn to watch for it. If let's go to the example of levels of insecurity, that you are insecure about being you, that you would rather be someone else. First thing I'm going to say to you is that's foolish, because you nor I can be any other person than we actually are. So why not just simply begin by accepting that? If you know that you have those insecurities, why not just first accept the fact in truth that you are insecure about who you are and what you're about. And then once you've done that, learn to observe that every single time that you get a sense of insecurity, just take a few moments and look at it. Ask one question. Where is that coming from? Well, first off, it's obviously coming from your ego. But if you learn the different subtleties of why the insecurity is there, then you can learn to understand it. And then as each moment shows up where you have that sense of insecurity, step one, simply accept the fact that you're insecure in that moment. And then take a look at it. What is it that you are insecure about? What other people think? Ladies and gentlemen, come on. If we get caught up in what other people think, and there are people in this world that do, then what happens is you are no longer living your life. You are living the life that other people want you to live because of your fear of what they're thinking about you if you do something. Well, in a nutshell, I would say get over it and learn to work with it. And as long as you work with one insecurity at a time, look, and don't tackle them all. Don't attempt to ever tackle everything about you all at once. In a monastery, what they do is they help you understand where a particular thing is coming from. And look, each of us feels, sense, and understand the same things. We really do. I mean, if you're sad, I know what sadness is because I've been there. If you get angry, I know what that is because I've also been there. But the difference about it is your unique expression, your unique understanding of you, and that is all driven by ego. If you allow your ego to be dominant, then it owns you. You become a slave to it, and you will never be able to change anything about you. Look, in my younger years, and I share this in every book I've ever written, that I used to be an extremely angry person. I had an abusive dad, one that always said that I was stupid. There were high levels of insecurity in me because of all of that. And all of that changed through the years because I became my own student and learned to understand in each moment why my behavior was the way it was. And I did it free of analysis, just simply by observing me. What triggered it? Why did it trigger it? And the interesting thing about that is most of the things that trigger those types of behavior within us are usually generally pretty meaningless. Even the idea of being impatient, it's pretty meaningless. I mean, if you're on the 405 in Los Angeles, that's the largest moving parking lot in the world. And if you know that and you're being impatient and getting into road rage on that stretch of highway, I'd have to ask you a simple, why in the world are you driving
that kind of behavior. And it's really not necessary. You know, to really understand oneself, we have to know how we operate. And the ego is a very significant uh, tool. In my mind, it's a magnificent tool, but only if it's utilized appropriately for ourselves. The ego is always going to want to tend to point us towards the idea of selfishness. So if you have any level of selfishness within you, that's going to create the anger. That's going to create the rage. That's going to create the levels of impatience. And yeah, I'm even going to say it's going to create levels of insecurity within you. Why? Because you're hung up in yourself. And that's not the purpose of being a human. The purpose of being a human is to live openly and freely, just as who you are, through the path of acceptance. And I've said that many times before. Just simply begin by accepting whatever you are feeling in that moment, and then take a look at what's driving it, and then work with those things, simply put, one at a time. It's not a major step, it's not a major feat, it's just learning to understand how your own individual nature operates. Don't become a robot. Be that individual. Celebrate that individuality. Celebrate the significance of your own self.
through the use of the ego. Have your ego be groomed into the divine. The ego loves material stuff. The ego loves to taunt us at how we look. The ego loves to just do all kinds of things in a sense to prove to yourself that you're better than everybody else. Well, forgive me for a second. But if I understand the idea of creation, in creation, everybody was created absolutely equal without fail. It doesn't matter what color you are. It doesn't matter what you look like. It doesn't even matter if you're male or female. We are all equal. On the inside, we are all exactly alike. But the thing that makes us different, the thing that gives us that unique expression, is the very tool that I am speaking with you about. And that's our divine ego. As long as you allow the ego to drive you towards material, physical reality, then it will. But if you learn to shift it and take it into a divine direction, into a full consciousness direction, it will also do that too. But that's up to you. All of us humans can swing both ways. We can be positive and negative. And the truth is we vacillate between those two ideas constantly. But here's the interesting thing. It's led by the ego, and you don't have to. Nobody has ever said that you have to be an ego-driven human. Nobody. In fact, all the teachings that I've ever studied in my entire life, they say the reverse. They talk about the significance and the beauty of each of us. They talk about the significance and the uniqueness of each of us. So if you ever truly, sincerely would like to know who you are, not what you are, because the ego likes the what idea. If you really want to know who you are, then allow your ego to educate you about yourself. It's one of the only things that can. It's the driving force that we all have. So if you want to be a robot, then go ahead. See if you can get rid of your ego. Because if you think you cannot. What you can do is let it teach you, and as it's teaching you, you learn to understand you. And if you allow that, then you will put your own self in situations that you know you would ordinarily be insecure about, and you would overcome insecurity. So as you overcome those things, that's the real purpose within myself of what I've been taught, of what the ego is. It's a great tool. Don't use it as a self-imposed weapon, not only against yourself, but against others. Learn to understand your own driving force, because the ego indeed is that driving force. It's you, it's your expression, it's everything about you. Celebrate your uniqueness and accept and face each thing as it comes up, not after the fact. And by the way, if you realize something after the fact, don't chastise yourself, because if you do, that's just the ego further embedding the very thing that you're attempting to overcome. You see, until you recognize that you're doing something, then you cannot change it. And if you chastise yourself because you recognize it after the fact, then you will not change it. Because to me, when you recognize something, let's say insecurity again, and it's after the fact, smile to yourself. Let yourself know that, I just caught that. Okay, now I have something to work with. And you'll find over a process of what we refer to as time, you will overcome each and every one of those things individually, and then it becomes collectively within you until ultimately there's absolutely no insecurity left in you. You see, the ego is actually helping you learn to understand your own insecurity so that you can overcome it. And then once you overcome it, that ego no longer has a grip on you through the idea of insecurity. Even anger, no matter what the case may be, you can use it as that tool so that you learn to understand yourself completely and fully until ultimately you find that inner place of peace, because there's no more turmoil brought into you by your own ego. So I hope you learn to the real value of the ego and then learn to use it as your personal teacher And you don't have to tell anybody you're doing that. You can just do it with yourself. And then when you look back over that process of time, you'll realize that any and every weakness that you ever had no longer exists. And now you're no longer a slave to your ego. Your ego now works for you. And you would become, in that moment in time, a true creative power. You would truly achieve a divine state. Why? Because now, instead of your ego being a dual-edged sword, it's only a single-edged sword, is being directed, focused, and controlled and influenced by you as the individual user of your own dynamic self. Thank you. My name is Stephen Hairfield. You can find me on Twitter, Facebook, and if you'd like to find out more about me, please visit my website at www.hairfield.com. I also have quite a few books out there. My suggestion is if you're looking to become empowered in your life, you might want to pick one of those up. I think you'll find it good reading because all I write about is subjects such as these and about how great we humans actually are. May love and light bless you and befall you on this day. Thank you, and may your journey be in peace.